The air on Veridia Prime always hummed. It was a melody woven from the rustle of broad, silver-veined leaves, the chime of crystal-clear streams, and the subtle, ever-present thrum of the Ethelwood groves, ancient trees whose amber hearts pulsed with the very life force of the moon. For the Sylvans, a people as slender and graceful as the young saplings that carpeted their forest floor, this symphony was existence itself. Their skin, a canvas of soft greens and browns, shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that shifted with their emotions, their voices a cascade of gentle, bell-like chimes. But today, the symphony was broken. Lyra L., an elder whose bark-like skin was etched with the wisdom of many seasons, felt the discordance like a physical wound. Her internal light flickered a distressed, muddy ochre. Before her, the tranquility of the glimmering glade lay shattered. Lush undergrowth was trampled and scorched. The delicate bell-shaped flowers that normally chimed in the breeze were crushed. Worse, the serene glow of a juvenile Ethelwood was extinguished, its trunk crudely hacked, its precious resonating amber heartwood gouged out. The Grond Reavers had come again. They were a brutal counterpoint to Sylvan grace, hulking, reptilian beings encased in scarred gray metal, their movements heavy, their voices guttural roars that tore through Veridia's peace. Their ships, angular and menacing, had descended upon the outlying settlement of Whisperwind 3 sun cycles past. The Sylvans there, possessing no weapons beyond their connection to the land and a philosophy of harmonious retreat, had offered no resistance. It hadn't mattered. The Grond had plundered, destroyed, and departed, taking with them caches of harvested amber and, most grievously, a score of Sylvan cultivators. Lyra Hell's chimes were a low, mournful threnody as she surveyed the damage. Other Sylvans moved through the glade, their lights dim with sorrow and fear. Young ones clung to their parents, their usually bright patterns muted. This was not the first Grond raid, but it was the most brazen, the closest to the Great Grove, the heart of their world. Their traditional defenses, camouflage, evasion, the empathic wave of peace they could project, which usually calmed aggressive fauna, were utterly useless against the Reavers' calculated cruelty and technological might. The Council of Mwam elders had convened beneath the boughs of the eldest Ethelwood, its vast network of roots a testament to its age, its amber core glowing with a light that usually brought comfort. Today, even its ancient hum felt strained. "They will return," Elder Theron chimed, his light a nervous, flickering blue. "They seek more amber. They see we are unresistant. Our pleas to the Galactic Concordiat have yielded only sympathy," added Mayala, her patterns swirling with frustration. "They offer monitoring solutions and diplomatic overtures, words that will not shield us when the Grond's cannons fire." Lyra L. listened, her own heart chime a heavy beat. She had argued for this before, a path so alien to their nature that it felt like a betrayal of their very being. But the sight of the savaged young Ethelwood, the silent terror in the eyes of the Whisperwind survivors, these images burned away her reluctance. "There is another option," Lyra Hell chimed, her voice softer than usual, yet cutting through the despairing murmurs. The other elders stilled, their lights focusing on her. "One that Concordiat advises against, one that speaks of discord." Theron's light pulsed a warning. "You speak of mercenaries, Lyra L. Beings who thrive on conflict. It is not the Sylvan way." "Is it the Sylvan way to wither and fade?" Lyra Hell countered, her own light flaring a defiant, though trembling gold. "To watch our young stolen, our groves desecrated, until nothing remains but silence and sorrow? We have offered peace, and they have answered with violence. Perhaps we must answer violence with a shield forged of something harder than hope." She paused, letting her words settle. "There is one group, known for their effectiveness against raiders like the Grond. They operate on the fringes, take contracts others refuse. They are Terrans." A wave of uneasy chimes swept through. The council. Humans. The name itself conjured disturbing images, gleaned from scattered traders' tales and lurid news feeds, hulking, loud, aggressive beings. Warriors who reveled in destruction, their culture built on conflict and dominance. Space orcs, some called them. Beings as far removed from Sylvan ideals as a star from a stone. Humans. Mayala's chimes were faint with disbelief. Lyra L., their methods are barbaric. They would bring their own form of destruction to Veridia. They are said to be brutally pragmatic, Lyra L. admitted, the admission a bitter taste in her non-existent mouth. But they are also said to honor their contracts, and the Grond fear little, but they might pause before a force known for its ferocity. She projected the data she had gathered, the Stormcrow Company. Their reputation was fearsome, their success rate against pirate and reaver clans undeniable. Their fees were, surprisingly, within the reach of what the Sylvans could offer, scraped together from their remaining reserves of processed amber. The debate was long, filled with anguish and trepidation. But with every passing moment, the shadows in the glimmering glade seemed to deepen. The silence from Whisperwind grew louder. Finally, with a heavy consensus born of desperation rather than conviction, the elders agreed. Lyra Hell herself undertook the task. From a secluded chamber deep within the eldest Ethelwood, using a comm unit salvaged from a long-crashed explorer vessel, she composed the message. Her tendril-like fingers, usually so adept at coaxing melodies from wind chimes or guiding the growth of luminous moss, fumbled with the alien interface. The contract offer was encoded, sent out into the vast, indifferent dark of space. It was a plea, a gamble, a desperate hope cast towards beings they instinctively recoiled from. As the signal launched, Lyra Hell's internal light pulsed a fragile pale green, the color of a new shoot pushing through scorched earth. She closed her eyes, her chimes trembling not just with fear, but with the faintest, most terrifying, whisper of hope that this pact with devils might, just might, save her world. The Symphony of Veridia Prime was broken. Perhaps, she thought with a shiver that rippled through her entire being, only a discordant noise could mend it. 3 rotations of Veridia's twin moons later, the sky itself seemed to curdle. A shadow, blocky and ill-omened, tore through the upper atmosphere, a brutalist scar against the soft blues and violets. It was nothing like the sleek, organic designs of most galactic ships. This was a vessel of hard angles and visible plating, stained with the burns of atmospheric entries and what looked suspiciously like patched-up weapons fire. The steel talon had arrived. It descended with a guttural roar of engines that shook the very leaves from the trees, settling in a designated clearing a respectful yet unsettlingly close distance from the main Sylvan settlement of Silverstem. A large ramp slammed down onto the mossy earth with a clang that sent a flock of startled sky wisps scattering. Lyra Hell stood at the edge of the clearing with a small delegation of elders, their bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically. A chaotic mix of pale yellows, anxiety, and muted blues, apprehension. The air still vibrated from the ship's landing, and a faint acrid smell, oil, metal, something else unidentifiably harsh, drifted towards them, an olfactory assault on Sylvan senses accustomed to floral pollens and damp earth. Then, they emerged. The first was massive, even broader than the Grond, but with a different kind of presence. Not the sleek menace of a predator, but the solid, unyielding power of a rockslide. Scars, old and new, mapped a history of violence across a rugged, square-jawed face. Close-cropped dark hair, flecked with gray at the temples, did little to soften the impression. He wore dull, functional armor, scuffed and utilitarian, and a heavy sidearm was strapped to his thigh. This had to be the leader, Captain Kaelen Stonefist Rourke. His eyes, a startling pale blue, scanned the Sylvan delegation, then the surrounding tree line with an unnerving intensity. Behind him came others, equally imposing if varied in build. One, a woman with a shock of crimson hair partially visible, under her helmet, had a cybernetic eye that glowed with a faint red light, sweeping over the environment in a way that made Lyra L. feel catalogued. This was likely Sergeant Lena Hex Petrova, the tech specialist. The rest of the Stormcrows fanned out, securing the ramp, their movements economical and purposeful, their heavy boots crushing the delicate undergrowth. Their voices, when they spoke to each other in short clipped phrases, were low and rough, like stones grinding together. Rourke took a few steps forward, his armored boots thudding on the soft earth. He stopped a few paces from Lyra L. The size difference was comical and terrifying. He had to be twice her height and many times her mass. Elder Lyra L. His voice was a gravelly boom, just as the tales described. It wasn't intentionally aggressive, perhaps, but it carried like a peal of thunder in the quiet sylvan air. Lyra L. managed a series of soft, wavering chimes, the sylvan equivalent of a polite affirmative. Her translator microbe, a tiny speck, of biotech adhering near her primary scent gland, whispered the meaning into her mind just as Rourke's own device would be relaying her chimes to him. Captain Kaelen Rourke, Stormcrow Company, he stated, inclining his head a fraction. It was perhaps the human version of a bow, but it felt more like a predator acknowledging lesser prey. Received your contract. Payment in Ethelwood amber confirmed upon successful completion of terms. Standard danger close indemnity applies. Lyra L's chimes conveyed her understanding, though the term danger close indemnity sent a fresh wave of anxiety through her. We welcome you to Veridia Prime, Captain, though the circumstances are regrettable. Rourke grunted, a sound that seemed to convey agreement or perhaps just acknowledgement. Regrettable is what keeps us in business, Elder. Let's talk terms and take a look at what we're dealing with. He gestured towards the settlement. Lead the way. And Hex? The red-haired woman, Petrova, looked at him. Yeah, Cap? Initial scans, threat assessment, structural integrity of local flora for defensive emplacements, and see if you can get a tap into whatever comms these Grond thugs are using. I want to know when they sneeze. Roger that, Hex replied, her cybernetic eye already pulsing as she unslung a complicated-looking device from her back. Her gaze swept over the towering Ethelwoods with an expression that Lyra L. couldn't decipher. Not awe, not reverence, but something calculating. The walk to Silverstem was an exercise in sustained tension. The Stormcrows moved with a heavy, rhythmic tread that was the antithesis of sylvan grace. Their casual talk, though filtered through translators, was blunt, filled with jargon and references to past conflicts that painted vivid, bloody pictures in Lyra L's empathic mind. Sylvans peered from the shelter of their living wood homes, their lights dim flickers of fear. Children who had never seen such beings hid behind their parents, some emitting distressed, high-pitched chimes. In the central clearing of Silverstem, Rourke surveyed the area, his gaze lingering on the interwoven living structures, the delicate bridges of woven vine, the softly glowing communal Ethelwood at its heart. Picturesque, he rumbled, the word sounding odd in his deep voice, but a defensive nightmare, no clear fields of fire. Cover and concealment favors the attackers if they get inside, and these tree houses won't stop a Grond disruptor bolt for more than a second. Lyra L's chimes were tinged with dismay. Our homes are grown, Captain. They live as we do. They'll die if we don't harden this place up, Rourke stated matter-of-factly. He turned to her, his pale eyes unblinking. We'll need to clear some of these outlying, ornamental growths, establish a perimeter, trenches, reinforced barricades, kill zones. Kill zones. The term itself was an obscenity to sylvan ears. Lyra L. felt a wave of nausea, a dissonant chord in her internal song. Captain, the trees, they are sacred, ancient. To fell them. Rourke's expression didn't change, but there was a fractional tightening around his jaw. Elder, the Grond aren't going to respect your sacred groves. They're going to burn them, and you with them if we give them the chance. My people fight to win. That means making hard choices. We can preserve some of your aesthetics, or we can preserve your lives. We're good, but probably not good enough to do both against a dedicated Reaver clan. He wasn't being deliberately cruel, Lyra L. realized. He was being honest, in the brutal, stripped-down way of a man who had seen too much of the galaxy's ugliest side. This was the iron bargain they had struck. Safety at the cost of their familiar peace, perhaps even pieces of their soul. Hex's voice cut in from her comm unit, patched through Rourke's earpiece and, by extension, Lyra L's. Translator. Cap, getting some interesting energy signatures from these big trees, the Ethelwoods. Beyond the amber. Complex resonance patterns. Could be exploitable, or a vulnerability. Need a closer look. Rourke nodded. Later. For now, defenses. He turned back to Lyra L., his shadow falling over her. We'll need access to your schematics, layouts, whatever you call them. And your people need to stay clear of the areas we designate for construction. It's going to get loud and messy. Lyra L. looked from Rourke's uncompromising face to the terrified flickers of her people, then to the majestic Ethelwoods that stood as silent, ancient witnesses. The price of survival was becoming clearer, and it was terrifyingly high. She gave a slow series of chimes, a sound of reluctant, mournful agreement. Rourke, seemingly satisfied with this capitulation, gestured to one of his squad. Mark out the primary perimeter. I want a 100-meter clear zone around the settlement core by nightfall. Use the sonic cutters for the smaller stuff, directional charges for anything too thick for a quick fell. Keep the damage contained, if you can. He glanced at Lyra Hell almost as an afterthought. We'll try not to break more than we have to. The words were small comfort, as the Stormcrows began to move, their tools already appearing from packs in their ship. Lyra L. couldn't help but feel that the Grond were not the only destructive force to have arrived on Veridia Prime. She watched as Rourke pointed towards a particularly ancient, gnarled glimmerwood tree, its branches adorned with wind chimes carved by generations of Sylvans, its base surrounded by flowers that glowed with a soft, internal light. That one, Rourke said to a burly human carrying a device that looked like a miniaturized cannon. It's blocking a key fire lane to the western approach. Take it down. Lyra L's chimes hitched, a silent gasp of horror. The iron bargain was already being paid, in scars upon their paradise. The transformation of Silverstem began with a high-pitched whine that grated on Sylvan's senses like claws on crystal. The human sonic cutters, wielded with an impersonal efficiency, bit into the living wood of Veridia. Trees that had stood for centuries, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind, shuddered and fell, their dying groans swallowed by the aggressive sounds of human industry. For the Sylvans, it was torture. Each fallen tree, each gouged trench, sent ripples of empathic distress through their community. Their bioluminescent patterns flickered with pain and sorrow, shifting into dark, bruised purples and agitated reds. Lyra Hell watched, her own chimes a constant low hum of grief as the familiar landscape around their settlement was reshaped into something stark and alien. The Stormcrows, oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the silent anguish they were causing, worked with relentless energy. They carved out defensive positions, erected barricades from the felled glimmerwood and tough ironbarks, their armored forms stark against the vibrant greens and blues of the forest. Captain Rourke was everywhere, his voice a constant gravelly rumble, directing his troops, inspecting angles of fire, occasionally hefting a fallen log himself with a grunt of effort that spoke of raw power. He seemed less a captain and more a force of nature, remaking the world to his grim specifications. He'd chosen a command post near the central Ethelwood, a decision that, while strategically sound, felt like a desecration to Lyra L. From there he could survey their kill zones, a term that still made her shiver. Sergeant Petrova, Hex, was a whirlwind of focused activity. She wasn't just overseeing demolitions, she was embedding sensors, calibrating automated sentry guns that popped up from the earth like metallic, malevolent fungi, and stringing nearly invisible monofilament wires between trees at ankle height. Her cybernetic eye glowed as she worked, occasionally pausing to make sharp, technical comments to Rourke, her voice devoid of any emotion beyond professional assessment. Perimeter's green on the north and east, Cap, Hex reported over the comms, her voice crackling in Lyra Hell's translator. West sector is still a bit dense. Got a couple of those big bulbous fungi trees blocking line of sight. Permission to use low-yield explosives. Negative on the explosives for now, Hex. Don't want to spook the clients more than necessary. Rourke's voice boomed back. Lyra L. felt a flicker of something akin to gratitude, though it was quickly doused by his next words. Use the heavy plasma cutter. Slower, but less alarming. We can always make bigger bangs later. The Sylvans tried to adapt. Some retreated deep into their homes, attempting to dull their empathic senses. Others watched in horrified fascination. A few brave ones, mostly younger Sylvans, approached the work zones, their lights flickering with a mixture of fear and curiosity, only to be gruffly waved away by human sentries. It was on the second day of this transformation that the Grond returned. Not the main fleet, but a scouting party. 3 agile, low-slung skiffs that burst from the dense canopy with snarling engines, clearly expecting to find the same undefended settlement they had preyed upon before. Alarms blared from the human-installed sensors, a harsh, repetitive shriek that was an insult to Veridia's natural harmonies. Contacts. 3 bogies. West sector fast approach. A human voice yelled from a newly constructed watchtower. To your stations, Rourke roared, his voice cutting through the suddenly chaotic air. Primary defensive line, hold your fire until they're in the designated arc. Hex, you got those sentries live? Affirmative, Cap, they're about to get a face full of welcome wagon. Hex's reply was grimly cheerful. Lyra Hell, who had been observing the less alarming removal of a fungi tree with a heavy heart, found herself near Rourke's command post. She saw him draw his heavy sidearm, his scarred face set in lines of intense concentration. The fear that had been a constant hum within her spiked into a sharp, icy terror. The Grond skiffs, weapons already blazing green disruptor bolts towards the settlement, swooped low. They clearly anticipated scattering terrified primitives. Instead, the world erupted. The human-emplaced sentry guns, previously hidden, popped up and spat streams of focused plasma. One Grond skiff, caught in a crossfire, listed wildly, smoke pouring from its engine. It careened into a barricade of sharpened ironbark logs with a sickening crunch of metal and an alien shriek that was abruptly cut off. The remaining 2 skiffs scattered, their pilots clearly shocked. But the Stormcrows were ready. From concealed positions, heavy repeating blasters opened up, their concussive reports echoing like thunder. Green bolts from the Grond met far more numerous and accurate volleys of red plasma. One human, a burly trooper Lyra L. had seen effortlessly hefting logs earlier, took a glancing hit to the shoulder. He roared, not in pain it seemed, but in anger, and returned fire with even greater ferocity, his weapon spitting death. Hex, nimble despite her gear, darted to a console, her fingers flying. Got a lock on their comms, Cap. They're squawking about unexpected resistance and was calling us metal shell demons. Cute. A moment later, a high-pitched squeal emanated from the remaining Grond skiffs as Hex unleashed some kind of electronic countermeasure. One skiff's engine sputtered and died, and it dropped heavily into the trees beyond the perimeter, followed by a distant muffled explosion. The last Grond skiff, heavily damaged and trailing smoke, tried to flee. Rourke raised his sidearm, sighted carefully, and fired twice. 2 precise shots and the skiff's remaining engine exploded. It tumbled end over end, crashing spectacularly into the very fungi tree whose removal Lyra Hell had been mourning moments before. Silence descended, thick and ringing, broken only by the crackle of fires and the distant fading whine of the last Grond's dying engine. The entire engagement had lasted less than 2 minutes. Lyra Hell stood frozen, her chimes stilled, her internal light a maelstrom of conflicting hues. Horror, yes, the violence had been swift, brutal, and absolute. But beneath it, a grudging, terrifying kernel of something else, grim admiration. The Stormcrows hadn't just fought, they had executed. There was a terrible beauty to their efficiency, a shocking finality to their actions. They were precisely what the Grond were not prepared for. Rourke holstered his weapon, his face unreadable. "Damage report," he barked into his comm. "Voices," replied, listing minor injuries, ammo expenditures. "No breaches, perimeter secure." Good work, Crows. He then looked at Lyra L., his gaze surprisingly direct. See, Elder? That's why we dig trenches. Before Lyra L. could formulate a response, a small Sylvan child, no older than a sapling, who had apparently hidden nearby, emerged from behind a decorative stone. Its light was a bright, unwavering yellow, of pure fascination, untouched by the adult Sylvan horror. It toddled towards Rourke, its tiny chimes clear in the sudden quiet. It stopped at his heavy blood-spattered boot, and after a moment of contemplation, reached out a delicate, tendril-like hand, and offered him a single, perfectly formed bioluminescent flower, its petals glowing a soft, pulsating azure. Rourke stared down at the child, then at the flower for a long, silent moment. His scarred, grim face seemed out of place in such a gentle interaction. Lyra L. held her breath. Then, with a surprising awkwardness that belied his earlier lethality, the massive human unclipped a gauntlet, his bare, calloused hand looking huge and clumsy next to the Sylvan child. He carefully took the flower. His bloodied, armored gauntlet lay discarded on the scarred earth, a stark contrast to the delicate, living bloom he now held with an almost reverent hesitation. He didn't speak, just looked at the flower, then back at the child, who chirped happily and toddled back to its now emerging, horrified mother. Rourke slowly reclipped his gauntlet, the flower still clutched carefully in his other hand. He didn't look at Lyra L. He just cleared his throat, a rough scraping sound. Sweep and clear the crash sites, he ordered into his comm, his voice once again the gruff commander. I want intel from their wreckage, and double the watch. They know we're here now. But Lyra L. had seen it. A flicker, a brief hesitation, a moment where the space orc had looked less like a monster and more like something else. Something unexpectedly, confusingly human. The Grond did not immediately return. The brutal efficiency with which their scouting party had been dispatched seemed to have given them pause. This lull, however, was not a time of rest for the Stormcrows. Rourke used it to push his company harder, refining defensive positions, running drills, and, most importantly to him, gathering intelligence. The wreckage of the Grond skiffs had yielded little beyond standard armaments and basic navigational data, but it confirmed the Reavers were operating from a mobile asteroid base, currently hidden somewhere in Veridia's dense ring system. It was Hex who pushed for a deeper understanding of the Ethelwood groves. Her initial scans had registered peculiar energy signatures, and the tech specialist's curiosity was insatiable. Cap, that amber isn't just pretty rock candy, she'd insisted, her cybernetic eye pulsing. The entire wood structure, it's like a massive organic resonator. There's something more to it than just looking good and making the locals feel fuzzy. Rourke, never one to ignore his specialist's hunches, especially when they pertained to potential enemy targets or exploitable resources, agreed. All right, Hex, take a walk in the woods, but you're not going alone. He'd eyed Lyra L. Elder, you'll accompany Sergeant Petrova and me. We need to understand what makes these trees so special to you, and apparently to the Grond. Lyra L., though still wary, agreed. The brief, almost gentle interaction between Rourke and the Sylvan child had planted a tiny seed of, not trust, perhaps, but a willingness to believe they weren't entirely monstrous. And if the Grond had a deeper interest in the Ethelwood than simple plunder, her people needed to know. The trio set out the next Veridian morning, venturing into the oldest part of the Ethelwood, a place the Sylvans called the Heart Grove. Sunlight, filtered through the immense silver-veined canopy, dappled the forest floor in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, blooming moon petal flowers, and the rich, resonant hum of the ancient trees. Even Rourke, encased in his functional armor, seemed to walk a little softer here, his usual booming voice unconsciously lowered. Hex, however, was a study in focused intensity. She moved with a scout's quiet tread, her good eye scanning the environment while her cybernetic one glowed, analyzing everything. She carried a portable scanner, its antenna array twitching as it took readings. The ambient energy here is off the charts, Captain, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not radiation, not localized EM. It's more like a harmonic field. Every one of these trees is vibrating at a specific, incredibly complex frequency. And they're networked, like a giant organic choir. Lyra L. chimed softly. The Ethelwood sings the song of Veridia. It is the record of our history, the cradle of our young, the focus of our meditations. Each tree has its own voice, and together they create the great harmony. Rourke grunted, looking up at the towering trees. A song, huh? He ran a hand over the smooth, bark-like surface of a nearby Ethelwood, its internal amber core glowing with a warm, golden light. So when the Grond came, they were just after the shiny bits? The amber? That is what we believed, Lyra L. chimed. It is valuable, sought after for its beauty and its soothing properties. Hex shook her head, her crimson ponytail swishing. Nah, Cap. The amber's just a byproduct, like a gemstone in a mountain. It's the mountain they're interested in, these resonant frequencies. If you could amplify them, control them, you could do a lot more than soothe. You could disrupt communications on a massive scale. You could induce psychosonic effects, disorientation, fear, even neural damage. Hell, if you found the right counter-resonance, you could probably shatter these trees from the inside out or worse. She paused, tapping her scanner. There's a dominant harmonic, a sort of master frequency, emanating from the very oldest trees in this grove. If someone could isolate and then overload that, a cold dread, sharper than any she'd felt before, pierced Lyra Hell. The idea of the Ethelwood, the source of their life and peace, being twisted into a weapon, was an abomination beyond imagining. Her internal light flickered a distressed, sickly green. Rourke looked at Hex, then at Lyra L's obvious distress. His usual gruffness seemed to soften, just a fraction. So the lizards aren't just smash-and-grab thieves, they're after a weapon. He looked around the grove again, his gaze lingering on the intricate patterns of light and shadow, the serene glow of the amber. Back on Terra, he said, his voice unexpectedly quiet, almost contemplative. We had places like this. Old-growth forests, cathedrals built by hand over centuries, places where you just felt something bigger than yourself. Places that held history. People would fight to the death to protect them. He looked at Lyra L. I'm guessing this heart grove is like that for you, Sylvans. Lyra L. was taken aback by the unexpected comparison, the surprising flicker of understanding in the human captain's eyes. It is. The soul of Veridia, she chimed, her voice trembling slightly. To lose it would be to lose ourselves. Rourke nodded slowly. Yeah, figured as much. He turned back to Hex. So if Groknar wants to turn this place into his personal boombox, how does he do it? And how do we stop him? Hex was already running simulations on her datapad. He'd need a way to focus and amplify the core frequencies. Some kind of massive harmonic drill or resonator array. He couldn't just chip away at it, he'd have to tap directly into the heart of the network. And he'd need precise data on the dominant frequencies. Data he might have been trying to get with those earlier raids, probing our defenses, maybe even trying to map these groves. Her cybernetic eye narrowed. The initial attack on Whisperwind, the one that brought you to us, Elder. They took cultivators, you said? Lyra L's light pulsed in affirmation. Yes, those who understand the songs of growth, who tend the young Ethelwood. They wouldn't just be hostages then, Hex said grimly. They'd be expert consultants whether they wanted to be or not. People who could tell the Grond exactly which trees to target, how to find that master frequency. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The Grond weren't just plundering. They were systematically gathering the components for a terrible weapon, using Sylvan knowledge against them. Rourke's hand went to the hilt of his sidearm, his knuckles white. So they're not just going to hit us with a frontal assault. They're going for a decapitation strike. Take out the heart, the whole body dies. He looked around the serene grove, his eyes now cold and hard. Not on my watch. A new tension filled the air of the heart grove, the ancient peace now overlaid with a grim understanding of the enemy's true, monstrous intent. Hex, holding a piece of fallen Ethelwood, watched its internal light pulse in her palm. It's natural. Vibrations resonated against her skin. Captain, she said, her voice low and serious, her cybernetic eye glowing with a new intensity. This stuff isn't just pretty, it sings a very particular song. And I think the Grond want to make it scream. The uneasy quiet that had settled over Veridia Prime shattered 3 sun cycles later. Long-range sensors, carefully hidden by Hex and Veridia's rings, shrieked a warning that echoed through the Stormcrows' comm-net and into Lyrahel's translator. The Grond Reaver fleet had arrived. Not just a few scouting skiffs this time, but a full-throated menace. A hulking, asteroid-battered command ship, aptly named the Despoiler, according to Hex's quick scan of its transponder, served as the flagship for a dozen smaller, equally pugnacious frigates and swarms of fighter craft. They punched through the atmosphere with brute force, ignoring any pretense of stealth, their intent clear. Overwhelming conquest. All crows, to your posts. Red alert, this is not a drill. Rourke's voice, amplified by the settlement's newly jury-rigged speakers, boomed across Silverstem. A jarring clarion call that sent Sylvans scrambling for the designated safe zones deep within the reinforced Ethelwood root systems. Their bioluminescent patterns flashed with stark terror, a chaotic aurora of fear. Lyrahel found herself at Rourke's command post, a reinforced bunker dug beneath the roots of the central Ethelwood. Screens flickered, showing tactical displays, energy readings, and external views of the approaching Grond Armada. The air thrummed with the focused energy of the humans, a stark contrast to the palpable panic of her own people. Hex, status on their primary vector, Rourke snapped, his eyes already scanning the incoming enemy formations. Looks like they're making a beeline for the Heartgrove, Cap, just like we figured. Hex's voice crackled back, surprisingly calm amidst the rising tension. But they're sending a heavy feint towards the main settlement, trying to split our focus. Typical Grond playbook. Overwhelm and terrify. Rourke's lips curled into something that might have been a grin, or perhaps just a baring of teeth. Well, they can try. He slammed a fist onto a console. All units, focus fire on the lead elements of the feint. Make 'em pay for every inch. Heavy guns, wait for my mark on the despoiler if it gets in range. I want to give Grokenar a personal welcome. The initial Grond assault was a symphony of destruction. Disruptor cannons, missiles, and plasma bolts rained down on the Dew, human-built defenses. Explosions rocked Silverstem, sending plumes of smoke and debris into the air. The ground shuddered. The air filled with the shriek of incoming fire and the deeper roar of the Stormcrows' return volleys. The human defenses, carved out of Veridia's living flesh, held. Trenches channeled explosions upwards, reinforced barricades, a fusion of Terran engineering and Sylvan lumber, absorbed punishing hits. The automated sentry guns, meticulously placed by Hex, chattered relentlessly, stitching lines of fire across the Grond attack waves. The Stormcrows themselves were a study in controlled chaos. They moved with a brutal efficiency, shouting battle cries and targeting data in their harsh guttural tongue that, to Lyrahel, sounded like the roars of primal beasts. They took hits, armor scarring and smoking, but they gave back far more. Each human seemed to be fighting with the fury of 10, their orcish aggression channeled into a devastatingly effective fighting force. Rourke was the eye of the storm. He issued commands with cold precision, his gaze flicking between tactical displays and the direct visual feeds. He seemed to anticipate the Grond's moves, countering them with swift, decisive orders. When a section of the western perimeter threatened to buckle under a concentrated assault, he didn't hesitate. Jorgensen, heavy ordnance on grid Kappa 7. Blow that ravine entrance now. Bury 'em. A moment later, a massive explosion tore through the western tree line, sending Grond attackers and tons of rock tumbling. The pressure on the line eased. Lyrahel, watching all this, felt a strange calm descend over her initial terror. The sheer indomitable will of these humans was infectious. They were loud, destructive, and utterly alien to her sensibilities. But they were holding. They were the shield she had desperately sought. A Sylvan approached her, his chimes faint and trembling. Elder, some of the young ones, their light fades with fear. The noise, the shaking. An idea sparked within Lyrahel. The songs, she chimed, her voice gaining strength. We cannot fight as they do, but we can sing. Sing the songs of resilience, the songs of the deep roots. Let our harmony be a balm against this terror. She began to hum, a low, resonant frequency that vibrated through the bunker floor. Other Sylvans, hearing her, slowly joined in. Their combined song, a melody of courage and endurance, spread through their hidden shelters. It couldn't stop the Grond cannons, but it seemed to steady the trembling lights of the frightened, offering a sliver of peace amidst the cacophony of war. Some of the human troopers, those close enough to the Sylvan shelters, paused, looking, surprised, then gave gruff nods of something that might have been appreciation before returning to the fight. Rourke himself, Lyrael noticed, allowed the corner of his mouth to twitch upwards for a nanosecond. The battle raged. The Grond, frustrated by the unexpected resistance, pressed harder. Their main target, Lyrael knew, was still the Heartgrove. This frontal assault was designed to pin the defenders, to draw their strength. Suddenly, a new icon flashed on the main tactical display. The despoiler itself, Grocknar's flagship, was lumbering into position, its massive forward cannon glowing, with malevolent energy, aimed directly at the central Ethelwood where the command bunker was situated. Cap! Grocknar's lining up for a love tap, Hex yelled over the comms. Rourke's eyes narrowed. Not if I can help it. All heavy batteries target that oversized tin can. Give him something to think about. Just as the Stormcrow cannon swiveled, a harsh, amplified voice boomed across all frequencies, overriding even the sounds of battle. It was Grocknar, his voice dripping with arrogance and fury. Hear me, primitives of Veridia, and you, metal-shelled, vermin who fight for them. Your defiance is an amusing but ultimately futile gesture. I am Warlord Grocknar. This world, and its power, will be mine. The transmission was accompanied by a visual. Grocknar himself, a massive, scarred Grond in ornate battle armor, sneering from the bridge of his ship. He then focused his reptilian gaze, as if looking directly at Rourke. You fight like cornered Jackal's humans, desperate and doomed, but the hunter always prevails. Rourke strode to the main comm panel, pushing aside a startled comms tech. He activated the external broadcast, his voice raw and powerful, cutting through Grocknar's theatrics. A bloody grin stretched across his face, visible even on the low-resolution feed Lyrael could see. We ain't Jackal's lizard brain, Rourke snarled, his voice echoing across the battlefield, a direct challenge to the Reaver warlord. We're Stormcrows, and a storm is coming for you. The air crackled with unspoken promises of violence. The Reaver's tide was at its peak, but the human rock stood firm, ready to unleash its own tempest. Grocknar's arrogant declaration was met not with fear, but with a renewed ferocity from the Stormcrows. Rourke's defiant challenge seemed to ignite a fire in their bellies. The battle for Veridia Prime entered its most desperate phase, while the feint against Silverstem continued. A significant portion of the Grond fleet, led by the despoiler, broke off and made a direct, brutal push towards the Heartgrove. Their intent was clear: seize the ancient Ethelwoods, deploy their terrifying resonant weapon, and break the Sylvans from their very core. They're going for the throat, Hex. Rourke's voice was tight over the comms as he watched the tactical display. Ground troops, heavily armored Grond shock infantry, were already deploying from landing craft near the perimeter of the Heartgrove, met by the dug-in positions of several Stormcrow squads. How's that little surprise of yours coming along? Just about ready to conduct this orchestra, Cap, Hex replied, her voice strained but determined. She was deep within the Heartgrove, surrounded by a web of conduits and strange devices. She'd jury-rigged, all connected to the largest, oldest Ethelwoods. Lyrael, having left the relative safety of the command bunker, was with her, along with a small group of Sylvan elders who understood the deepest songs of the Ethelwood. The Sylvans are keyed in. It's wild, Cap. They're chanting. It's actually modulating the tree's core frequencies. Never seen anything like it. Rourke grunted. Just make sure it's a tune Grocknar doesn't like. He turned to his own grim task. The despoiler was now close enough, its massive disruptor cannon charging with an ominous sickly green glow. All heavy batteries on my mark. We're cracking that egg wide open. The battle became a maelstrom. In the Heart Grove, Grand shock. Troops expecting to roll over primitive defenses slammed into Stormcrows who fought with the tenacity of cornered bears. Plasma fire crisscrossed between the ancient trees, scarring bark that had stood untouched for millennia. The air filled with the roar of human weapons, the guttural war cries of the Grond, and the whine of straining energy shields. Then, amidst the chaos, a new sound began to emerge. It started subtly, a low thrumming that vibrated through the very soil. It was the Sylvan elders led by Lyra L., their chimes no longer soft or mournful but focused, powerful, and strangely resonant. They sang ancient songs of power, of growth, of the deep, unyielding strength of Veridia. Their collective will, amplified by Hex's technology, began to interact with the Ethelwood's natural harmonics in an unprecedented way. Now Hex, light it up, Rourke bellowed into the comm, even as he directed his own ship's cannons towards the despoiler. Showtime, Hex yelled back. With a surge of energy, the Ethelwood groves exploded not with fire, but with light and sound. A blinding, pure white radiance pulsed from the amber hearts of the ancient trees, accompanied by a deeply resonant, incredibly powerful wave of sonic energy. It wasn't a chaotic noise, but a focused, harmonic chord of immense power, beautiful and terrifying at once. The effect on the Grond was immediate and devastating. Those near the grove staggered, clutching their helmets, their movements becoming erratic, their comm systems filled with static and piercing feedback. Their energy weapons flickered and died as the resonant frequency interfered with their power cells. The very air seemed to press in on them, disorienting and unnerving. What sorcery is this? Grocknar's voice shrieked over the comms, no longer arrogant but laced with genuine shock and pain. His flagship, the despoiler, shuddered as the harmonic wave washed over it, its shields flickering erratically. That's your cue, Crows, Rourke roared. Push 'em back, hit 'em while they're rattled. The human counterattack was savage. With the Grond disoriented and their technological edge blunted by the Ethelwood's unexpected song, the Stormcrows surged forward. They used the terrain, the very trees the Grond sought to defile, as cover, their brutal close-quarters combat skills coming to the fore. It was no longer just a defense. It was a purge. Rourke, aboard the steel Talon which had lifted to join, the spaceborne fray seized the opportunity. Fire! Heavy plasma cannons from the Stormcrow ship and their ground emplacements, unaffected by the Sylvan-generated frequencies, slammed into the despoiler. Shields, already weakened, collapsed. Explosions blossomed across its hull. The massive Grond, flagship listed, its main weapon sputtering out before it could discharge. Grocknar, his bridge collapsing around him, saw his invasion force crumbling. His shock troops on the ground were being systematically dismantled. His ships were confused, their systems failing. He had underestimated these primitives and their barbarian protectors on a catastrophic scale. Rourke's voice cut through his despair, broadcast directly to the despoiler's bridge. Had enough, Lizard King? Or do you want another verse of our little song? With a final defiant roar of rage and disbelief, Grocknar attempted to steer his crippled flagship towards the Heart Grove, a final, suicidal act of spite. But Rourke was ready. A precisely aimed volley from the steel Talon struck the despoiler's engine core. The Grond command ship erupted in a series of internal detonations, its structure tearing itself apart. It began a slow, fiery descent, not towards the Heart Grove but away into the dense, unpopulated swamplands miles to the north. The remaining Grond forces, leaderless and facing a seemingly supernatural foe, broke. Those that could fled into the upper atmosphere, pursued by the Stormcrows' fighters. Those on the ground either surrendered or were overwhelmed. Silence, when it finally fell, was profound. The only sounds were the crackling of distant fires, the tired panting of human soldiers, and the soft, fading hum of the Ethelwood, its light slowly returning to its normal, gentle glow. The Sylvans, exhausted but unharmed, emerged from their shelters, their chimes a melody of disbelief and dawning relief. Rourke landed the steel Talon near the edge of the Heart Grove. He found Grocknar, surprisingly alive, having been thrown clear in an escape pod just before his ship disintegrated. The warlord lay amidst the wreckage of his ambition, his ornate armor cracked and scorched, his reptilian face a mask of stunned disbelief. Several Stormcrows stood guard, their weapons trained. Rourke approached, his own armor bearing fresh scars. He looked down at the defeated Grond leader. Grocknar coughed, spitting out a blackish fluid. He looked up at Rourke, then at the now peaceful, glowing Ethelwood, where Lyra L and Hex were helping the Sylvan elders. Their forms a strange but effective mix of fragility and resilience, of ancient tradition and startling ingenuity. "What are you?" Grocknar gurgled, his voice a hoarse whisper. The question wasn't just for Rourke, but for the entire impossible scenario. The singing trees, the fierce humans, the Sylvans who had found a weapon in their soul. Rourke, panting, slightly from exertion, just grunted, the closest thing to a smile on his lips. Problem solvers. The days that followed the Battle of the Heartgrove were filled with a strange mixture of sorrow and nascent joy on Veridia Prime. The scars on the landscape were undeniable, blackened patches where Grond machinery had burned, felled trees that had once stood for eons, and the lingering scent of ozone and discharged weaponry. Yet beneath the damage, the symphony of Veridia was slowly, tentatively, beginning to mend. The Ethelwood groves, though some trees bore the marks of stray fire, still hummed with their ancient power. Their light perhaps a little softer, a little wiser. The Stormcrows, battered but unbroken, were a hive of activity. They salvaged what they could from the Grond wreckage, their haul of enemy tech and raw materials a significant bonus to their contracted payment. They tended their wounded, repaired their gear, and began the methodical process of preparing the Steel Talon for departure. Their presence, once a source of terror for the Sylvans, was now regarded with a complex awe. The hulking, loud humans were still intimidating, their movements abrupt, their voices like rock falls, but now the Sylvans saw them through a different lens. The lens of shared peril, of unexpected alliance, and ultimately of salvation. Lyra L found herself observing them often. She saw the easy camaraderie between Rourke and his troopers, the fierce loyalty in Hex's sharp eyes as she argued, good-naturedly with a grizzled engineer over engine diagnostics. She saw them share rations, their laughter booming and uninhibited, a stark contrast to the Sylvans' quiet chimes, yet no longer threatening. They were still space orcs in their raw power and pragmatism, but Lyra L now understood there was more to them than the brutal exterior. There was a code, a strange sort of honor, and an astonishing capacity to protect those they'd given their word to. On the eve of their departure, Lyra L approached Captain Rourke. He was standing alone at the edge of the newly cleared perimeter, looking out over the forest as Veridia's twin moons began their ascent, casting long, soft shadows. The small bioluminescent flower the Sylvan child had given him was tucked into a crevice in his armor, its azure glow a tiny beacon against the scarred metal. "Captain Rourke," Lyra L chimed, her voice clear and steady. Rourke turned, his expression less guarded than she had ever seen it. "Elder Lyra L. The Stormcrows leave on the morrow's tide," she stated, though it was not a question. "That's the plan," he confirmed, his voice a low rumble. "Job's done. Grocknar is our prisoner. What's left of his fleet won't be bothering anyone for a long time. You're safe. Because of you," Lyra L chimed. "Because of the Stormcrows. Veridia owes you a debt that Amber alone cannot repay." Rourke shrugged, a characteristically blunt gesture. "We were paid, Elder. That's the deal." But his eyes softened slightly. "Though I'll admit this contract had unique parameters." Lyra L extended a tendril-like hand. Resting, on her palm was a small, intricately carved piece of Ethelwood. It was smooth to the touch, warm with an internal light, and it pulsed with a soft, rhythmic hum, a unique melody, calming and resonant. "The elders wished for you to have this. It is a heartstone from a branch of the eldest Ethelwood that was damaged in the battle. It sings a song of resilience and of gratitude, a memento." Rourke looked at the heartstone, then at Lyra L. For a moment, He seemed at a loss for words. He carefully unclipped his gauntlet, the same gesture he'd used with the child, and then took the stone. It fit into his calloused palm, the gentle glow reflecting in his pale eyes. "Thank you, Lyra, he said, his voice rougher than usual. "We don't usually get souvenirs." He paused. "Your people, they've got a lot of courage. Different kind than ours, maybe, but courage all the same." "We learned much from you, Captain," Lyra replied, her internal light pulsing a warm, golden hue of sincerity. "About strength, about facing the storm rather than just weathering it." "Yeah, well," Rourke said, looking a little uncomfortable with the sentiment. "You Sylvans taught us a thing or two as well. Never figured a forest could kick that much ass." A rare, almost smile touched his lips. Hex, who had approached, quietly let out a small snort of amusement. "The galaxy will hear of this, Captain Rourke," Lyra said. "They will hear how the Stormcrows, the space orcs of Terran legend, fought for the Sylvans of Veridia Prime, how they honored their word, and how they helped us find a new strength in our own song." Rourke just nodded, stuffing the heartstone into a pouch on his belt. "Maybe, maybe not. Galaxy's a big place. Mostly it just remembers who won." He offered a hand, palm open. "Take care of your woods, Elder." Lyra didn't hesitate. She placed her delicate hand in his massive, scarred one. The contact was brief, a meeting of two vastly different species, two vastly different ways of being, who had found common ground in the crucible of war. "And you, Captain, may your own storms be ones you can navigate." The next morning, the Steel Talon rose from Veridia Prime on a pillar of controlled fire, its battered hull a testament to the battle won. The Sylvans gathered, not in fear this time, but in a quiet farewell. As the ship dwindled to a speck against the brightening sky, Lyra felt the heartstone she carried, a twin to the one Rourke now possessed, hum gently against her skin. The comms crackled one last time, Rourke's voice, staticky but clear. "Take care of your woods, Elder. They're nice." The connection cut. Lyra felt a complex sylvan emotion akin to a smile, as the ethelwood around her, and indeed all across Veridia Prime, seemed to hum a little brighter, a little stronger. The symphony of their world was mending, and woven into its ancient melodies was a new, unexpected strain. A resonant chord of iron and light, a testament to the fierce, unlikely saviors from Terra. The space orcs weren't what anyone expected. And Veridia, and perhaps a small corner of the galaxy, would never quite see humans the same way again. Their song had changed, forever.